obviously I am not going to be reviewing this paddle. I'm definitely the definition of biased. I get it, so I'm not going to talk about it. But I will say, some things about the story. I think the story is very cool, and I think, you guys might think the same thing. And yeah, at least from my perspective, it was definitely a fun journey to do this with John Q. So I remember, basically I was in Colorado. I was going to see a good friend of mine, JP Parker at Pickler Aurora, and John Q was actually right in that area. So John Q was there, and I said, "Hey man, let me come on your podcast. I'm the biggest paddle nerd ever. I love your reviews. I watched every single John Q review. So it was very cool to get on that podcast, and we just nerded out about paddles for basically 2 hours. And so it's funny because I checked out his basement, and his basement's insane. I mean, it's got at least probably 1,000 paddles. He's got a PB core tester, probably a spin tester, deflection, grit. I mean, the guy is just obsessed with paddles, and in the best way. I mean, who am I to judge somebody for being obsessed with paddles, right? It's funny because there are people talk about do reviewers know their stuff? Well, some of them do, some of them don't, and that's okay. I mean, but John is, I think, the most educated. He's got to be the most educated reviewer in terms of just everything. I mean, he knows more about paddles than anybody I've ever met, and I was shocked. So, I was very much impacted by just seeing his basement. And part of it's kind of funny. I think there's if you look at his basement, like some people will probably say he's insane, but for me, I was like, wow, like this guy's really who he says he is. So I was impacted by that, and then I remember thinking about that for the next couple of days. Like, we kept talking, we kept in touch, and then a couple weeks later, I was like, hey man, we talked about how you think full foam paddles are better. I think that Gen 3 paddles are better. I haven't felt like full foam paddles gave me that crisp feel. Do you think you could make one? Like what would you do? And I wasn't even in the beginning thinking about doing a partnership to sell a bunch of paddles. It was more so just like, I know that you know about paddles. How would you make a full foam paddle that would actually play the way that I like it? And so then that eventually evolved into us making a paddle together. And we just became, very good friends throughout the process. He was in the group chats with our suppliers. He was, going back and forth with people in China. We were doing some R&D, and he was sending like it's funny, he sent like a super intricate, prototype design written down on paper with all these different, like super specific, like foam densities and things like that. And I remember getting a call from our, Chinese liaison who worked at the factory, and she's like, wait a second, is this John Q the guy that does those paddle reviews? And I'm like, yeah, it is. And it's funny because people don't realize this, but in factories in China, you see all these views on paddle reviews, and I bet the paddle reviewers don't even know this, but a lot of those views on paddle reviews are actually people that work in Chinese factories because they think it's awesome because, I mean, they're the ones that are making the paddles. And so they, like, it's funny, I remember I was at lunch and I was walking by and there were these two guys on their phone like this, just looking intently, saying something to each other. I couldn't understand it, obviously I don't speak Chinese fluently yet, but I'm looking at them and they're watching intently, and I think it was the Pickleball Effect podcast, and I just started laughing. I had no idea that was something that went on, and then one of them starts like cheering and getting like super excited, and I didn't know what it was about. I asked the translator I was with, I'm like, what just happened? And the guy is like, elated. The guy watching is elated, and the lady's like, oh, Kyle Trenga's maining his paddle now. And I'm just like, dude, what is going on? Because it's his, the guys in the factory, to them, it's their paddle. I mean, they, obviously they've been given direction by the people that, actually the people in charge of the companies, but to them, they're making the paddle. And when a guy in a factory has made, for example, this paddle or another paddle, and then he sees that a reviewer, like if Chris Olsen's maining it, I mean, that guy in the factory is excited, and they watch YouTube. It's actually, I think, one of the things that makes them happy. So that was pretty cool. Kind of funny little side thing. But okay, so they knew who John Q was already. A lot of people in the factories know the reviewers. Depends on the factory, but in the factories that are more like in tune with what's going on, they know the reviewers. So that helped a lot. They were like honored actually to make a paddle for John Q. I remember like I was in there and I was in China, and I remember being fully part of the process, and I was like, hey guys, like let's make this happen. And they were kind of enthused to make a paddle for me. I think being a pro player, they had kind of heard about me, kind of didn't really care, but they knew to take me pretty seriously, at least because they knew that I had some sort of following. But I remember when we brought John Q into the fold, And we told the next day at the factory, especially with our little group, it was like a different type of energy. Like they were so excited to make a paddle for John Q, and they were saying like, look, we have to make this perfect. Like they want it to be, So that was kind of touching, kind of funny. Like they care more about the reviewers than the pros, which you probably should, but that was kind of funny. So the whole energy in the factory changed when they knew that it was John Q. I'm not going to talk about how the paddle plays or the prototyping and testing because I'm going to completely stay out of paddle performance because obviously I'm biased and this is not an infomercial. But prototypes happened. We tried the paddle and I liked it, obviously. And, everybody around was very excited with how it was performing. And, the people that we've given it to out here, well, it's funny. I just said I wasn't talking about the performance. Basically, yeah, we thought the paddle was good. So we're like, okay, let's go ahead and move forward with this. One of the funny things about it too was I asked John for more of a crisp, Gen 3 style paddle because that was kind of what I was looking for. I kind of felt like, especially me, I like to rip the ball. And when I take big cuts out of the ball, I kind of feel like full foam paddles get a little mushy. I get a little disconnected and I kind of want the feedback. Just to know, did I hit a good shot? Did I hit a bad shot? And it's funny, like I remember the first day I tried it and I was dinking with it and I was like, okay, yeah, like there's some good, like I actually feel good feedback and I feel good control and I was excited. But then the more I played with it, I'm like, wait a second, John, like this is a rocket launcher. Like this is as powerful as a boomstick. And John was like, yep, that's what he, if anybody knows John with his reviews, like he likes power paddles. That's his whole thing. And he made this, he had no qualms about it. He wanted to make this thing extremely powerful. So, yeah, I will say that I'm not going to review it, but I'll say if you don't want a power paddle, don't get it because it's very powerful. I think one of the things with us is we didn't want to do anything that was like super marketing fluffy. I was never really somebody that liked the marketing fluff of pickleball. I think that if you're in the game, you see the paddle companies, and I'm not against any of the marketing of other paddle companies. I'm not going to try to, throw shade at another paddle company. But I feel like, among other industries, pickleball especially is so, just leaning towards like marketing fluff, all these silly things and, super complicated paddles with like new materials. I'm not going to call any of them out because then I'd be calling out another company, but just like this crazy, these inventions that are like, and I mean, Isaac Olson actually said it pretty well in his last podcast where he just said, look, like we just care about how the paddles play. Like, is the paddle going to be better or worse, whether or not you put, some crazy stuff into it. Like you can make the core make the most intricate core ever. I could do it too. I could go on ChatGPT and say, okay, how do I make the most intricate core design possible? And then, have everybody say, wow, that's like some crazy R&D that went on. But in reality, does it actually make the paddle better? Another thing that John said too, he was like, look, man, I'm not going to try to reinvent the wheel with some sort of new tech or new, like new materials. I'm just going to take the materials we have on hand, take the best of the best that we have, and then maybe add one thing here and there, do some cool stuff with the surface, and then just make the best paddle that can possibly be made with what the current menu options are that are available. And that was his plan. And I'll leave it up for you to decide whether he succeeded or not. But I would definitely recommend giving this paddle a try. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. It was definitely cool to just see, like a paddle genius making a paddle, and just the fact that I even had the opportunity to do it with him, to play a part with it, and to somehow convince him to do it the one time that he's going to do it, because I don't think he'll do it again, was pretty cool. So that's all. Again, I know that I'm biased. I hope this doesn't seem like an infomercial. I just, think the paddle is great, and that's pretty much it. I'll leave it at that. Thanks, guys.